So the chairman of Club Football believes what he calls grassroots football will work here in China. Besides managing amateur leagues, the company also sees a large part of its operations dedicated to training a new generation of young Chinese football talent. But it's not just football that Club Football is teaching. There's more to it than just that.
Yinqiao Football Club is jointly run by several Beijing schools. There's only a few clubs like this in Beijing, and Yinqiao charges the lowest member fees in town.
In the beginning, there were only a few dozen. Now we have 300-400 kids.
But to most parents, quality of training is what decides which club they send their children to.
As long as my son improves, price doesn't matter.
But football wasn't always enough to convince Chinese parents to enroll their kids. In response to this, Club Football hired native English speakers with coaching certificates from the English Football Association. Now, young Chinese can learn a second language while practicing their classes.
Up to 70–75% of our business would come from the junior football programs we do. So mostly from the junior footballers, from parents paying their course fees, but also for some other partners. We work with the Beijing Football Association, for example, and we have some other types of class with schools where the schools pay us directly to come in and run football classes.
There was no special thinking other than a realisation there were two things to put together, and we put them together and it's been very, very successful. In England, in other football-loving countries, come and play football is enough. In China, speak English proved to be the catalyst that actually got the Chinese kids to come.
Liu Libin is responsible for the club's training center. Today he is busy talking to interested parents. Some even paid a member fee without any further consultation.
The price is okay, because 1 hour of English class would be 200 yuan anyway.
We found that this club is very international. The coaches are from Europe or countries where football is much more developed than in China. The coaches also have professional certificates. To begin with, courses are taught in Chinese and English, but as the kids get better, they use English more and more. When they start playing the leagues, the teachers communicate with them using only English. This way, the kids improve their language skills, especially football-related words.
This combination of sports and language has proved successful. The club now has more members than all other children's football clubs in Beijing combined.
If you count the schools we work with, we have around 1,700 students per season. First, we started this program pretty early, so we have a good foundation and a reputation. Second, we have a stable team of 11 full-time foreign coaches that can teach at different pitches and schools around town. This enables us to recruit a large number of students. We have open classes at 10 locations and teach at 10 schools, so that's 20 locations in Beijing.
Club football is still growing, and Simon's dreams of expanding to other cities across China, starting with those close to Beijing. This would make club football the first interregional amateur club in China.
Of course, now, I think to an extent we have proved that our model of grassroots football can work in China and it can thrive as a business in its own right. But we have worked very, very hard and for a very long time to prove a model that retains all of the ethics and the morals of the amateur game of football, but delivers it into a Chinese market where we have pressure on land, we have pressure on kids to study, etc. So it's not an easy thing to do, but there is no reason why we should not be in every city in China, and we are starting now.
So, Professor, before we talk about the future of CCF and bringing investors in, I still want to focus a little bit on the revenue mix of CCF and how that differs from a professional football club.
So let's first take a look at the revenue mix for professional soccer clubs. And these are the clubs that have their own professional teams and with star players. So for these clubs, their revenue usually comes from three main sources. The first one is commercial. That includes both sponsorship and merchandise sales. That's usually about 30 to 40%. And the second big chunk actually comes from broadcasting rights, and that's another 30 to 40%, and the remaining comes from match day ticket sale, which is usually 20 to 30%. Now, in contrast, for amateur clubs like CCF, well, because they're not pro clubs and they don't own their own teams, so it's going to be more difficult for them to attract sponsorship, and obviously their revenue is not be coming from, say, broadcasting rights, which means for CCF they have to come up with a more creative ways to find revenue to make money, and they actually landed on junior football coaching. Right? So for CCF, you look at the composition of their revenues, 75% comes from junior football coaching, and another 15% comes from commercial, sponsorship, and the remaining comes from sort of the money comes from the players.
Wow, okay, so quite a tremendous bulk of revenues coming from junior football coaching. And from our interviewee as well, from our report, we show that price advantage is not necessarily the determining factor, right, in choosing a club football to coach your kids. Rather, other added value services and quality matter a little bit more, huh?
Well, if price is not the determining factor, what this means is chasing to the bottom and trying to offer the lowest price possible is not going to do it. So instead, to win out the market, you need to follow a differentiation strategy. And that's, I think, is exactly what CCF is trying to do. It's trying to differentiate from its competitors who also offer junior football coaching by using foreign coaches, as well as by combining football lessons with English learning lessons. And I think this is a very clever strategy, and this is also a strategy that's highly tailored towards the Chinese market. And because they successfully transformed Chinese parents' perception of soccer lessons from entertainment to education. Right? So instead of paying for their children's leisure time, the parents feel like, well, they are actually paying for their children's education, and soccer lessons is just a new and more creative way for their children to learn English. Right? And when you package it that way, well, it makes the entire service offering a lot more attractive and interesting.
All right, so you mentioned that bringing in VC capital might be a good marketing tactic. And of course, bringing in external capital, very natural when a company wants to expand, right? But there's downsides as well. You're sort of losing the sovereignty of the company that you built.
Exactly. I think there are several major downsides to raising external capital, especially from venture capitalists. The number one concern is actually dilution. So at the start of a company, the founder and the founding team jointly owns 100% of the company's equity. But our research actually shows that after several rounds of external financing, by the time the company gets to the IPO stage, the founding team actually will only own 10 to 15% of the firm's equity. So you have this huge dilution problem. And dilution not only means you lose cash flow rights, it also means that you lose control rights of your company, as you mentioned, Michael, right? So that's the second concern, that is the control issue. So as founders, you don't actually get to make all the major decisions for the company anymore. And a third concern is actually conflict of interest between external investors and the founders. And unfortunately, we see this happening all the time at startup companies because those external investors are financially driven, right? So they invest into the company and they are looking for a quick access. So they want to exit their investment as soon as possible. So which means they may actually force company founders to make decisions that will boost up short-term performance, but will actually be detrimental to the company in the long run. So this is another big concern.
Well, I guess it's now or never for China Club Football because it does want to expand its presence outside of Beijing. Again, it's one of several amateur football leagues here in this city, so getting those external investors in is going to be crucial for the company going forward. Thank you very much for our discussion today on China Club Football, Professor, and joining us in the studio.
Well, thanks for having me.
All right, so China Club Football asks the question right now, why shouldn't we be in every city in China? It is a very ambitious goal, no doubt, and with an increasingly affluent Chinese middle class seeking to boost their quality of life, the demand for sports classes in sports leagues are on the rise. And make sure to follow us on Weibo, WeChat, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter to share your thoughts. And if you have an interesting business case to tell, you can always send us an email at newmoney@cctv.com. Thanks for joining us this week on New Money. We'll see you again next time.